So we move on to our other topic for the day, building a social business in 2021. So we have our speaker, Mr. Curtis Midkiff.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Curtis.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. So welcome to our GDMS platform. Curtis has nearly 2 decades of combined experience in marketing, communications, and social digital strategy. He is highly regarded brand strategist and social media expert who has led the social engagement efforts for a range of organizations, including Southwest Airlines, the American Red Cross, and the Group. So there, Mr. Curtis Metcalf. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here with you this evening, right? I'll give this disclaimer. We're still in this work from home environment. So this is we're about 10:30 in the US. So if you hear some melodic sounds that sound like crying, it really is my kids really hyping me up for this speech. So they're in the middle of kind of cartoon time and our typical Saturday dance party. So if you hear some knocking on the door, they're going to be, it's time for daddy's dance party. But I'm very excited, and I thank you guys for this. I thank you guys for this invite because it's been something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And I also looked at the time that it is there, and I said, it's probably 8:30 p.m.
Right.
in some places. So I was like, would they want a lot of slides? And I said, well, maybe not, but we're going to have this in a inviting conversation about building a social business in 2021. So what we're going to talk about today really focuses on a few things. The definition of social business is the first thing we're going to talk about. How do we define a social business? And then I want to share a slide with you all that really transformed the whole way that I think about social. And it was courtesy of the Altimeter Group, Charlene Lee and Brian Solis, who did this six stages of social business transformation. It changed the way I looked at how I led in social organizations. And I hope that it does the same for you. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of this from to vibe. So, we want to talk about where we are and talk about to, because there's a few steps there that you can take to start this journey to becoming a social business. As was mentioned when I was introduced, I've had the pleasure of being in social for almost 12 years now, which feels like a lifetime. When I started, Tom was my friend on MySpace and Facebook. I still had to have an EDU account. And, the way we looked at social was so different, as many of you on this call can attest. I started in a time where social was on your job title. Social was an and. If you had somebody doing social, a lot of people at that time, when I started, it was many times social media, because it wasn't understood by the C-suite, was something that kind of the intern did. The intern managed Facebook and, posted a nice picture. My initial title when I came into social was like manager of PR and social media. And, so it was something that was kind of like businesses said, okay, I think that it's going to do something. I think it's going to help. We can't, it can't hurt. It was more of it can't hurt us to have a Facebook page. It can't hurt us to have, as people would say, have a Twitter. It couldn't hurt us to have YouTube, but we didn't really understand in our sectors what benefits it had. Now you fast forward to 2021, and we're having a global digital marketing summit. Over 3 days, we've talked about advancing, innovating, and empowering. And I'm sure threaded throughout that, any conversation of digital marketing, advancing, innovating, and empowering, I'm sure there have been lots of conversations about various aspects of social. Now you have subsets of social. You have influencer marketing, which was something that didn't really exist. You have that now. You also have, now you have these tremendous investments in paid social media. Companies are spending millions of dollars in ad budgets to make sure that their customers see the message on social media. That didn't happen then. And now, as my wife says, she says, you're just a lucky guy. Like now, she said, there are teams and careers built on social media. Now we have teams, we have social media teams where, we now have leadership roles and career advancement opportunities in social. So I wanted to give you that landscape to show you how things have changed. So now it's not enough to have a social media program in your company. Now you have to begin thinking about leading the conversation with your leaders to become a social business. So, we like to define social business, and I'll try to show this slide, but if not, I can definitely share it post. A social business is a business where social media is strategically aligned with business outcomes. I'll say that again. A social business is a business where social media is strategically aligned with business outcomes. I'll share this to you because I consider myself a social media practitioner, meaning that I'm always learning. I'm learning from my teams, I'm learning from you all, I'm learning from peers. But one of the things that I had to come around to doing was strategically aligning what I'm doing socially with business outcomes, which meant that I learned that when I was making presentations to the C-suite about a particular initiative in a program, I was really, really focused on how we were doing on social. So I would say, well, you know what? It's going to grow our followers by a 3x margin, or it's going to we're going to get so many likes and shares and comments, and we're gonna have this viral moment, et cetera, et cetera. And I would present these, and then in the C-suite, sometimes there would be kind of these blank looks, and it was I'm coming into meetings where the conversations preceding my presentation were about P&L, like how are we going to be competitive with others in our category? How are we going to increase our market share? How are we going to recruit and engage and retain new customers? How are we going to really keep the lights on? How are we going to do these things that don't necessarily show up on the social side? So I began to really understand that we have to strategically align with business outcomes. So I became more of a student. In addition to being a practitioner of social media, I kind of went back to kind of internal MBA school, with companies, and really started doing things like encouraging my teams. Yes, we're the subject matter experts on social, but let's get deep into this annual report. Let's get deep into earnings. Let's get deep into looking at the larger strategies, looking at, let's not just be focused on our social strategy, but we need to be students of the product marketing strategy. What does product marketing do? Like, what are the products we have coming out? What are their goals with those products? What is R&D? What is the R&D strategy? What is the brand strategy? What direction is the brand going? What are any, in our world, channel strategies? How are we, we're global and we're working with various, Home Depots and Lowe's and all kind of international distributors. And, what is that strategy? So then what we could do, we take all that back. My social team has a binder of homework. We take that back and we start saying, okay, this is how what we're doing in social ultimately can impact this. This is how, when you start looking at what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, kind of this holistic approach to social, like we can now begin to point to how content over time is impacting brand perception, which impacts the way, brand perception, particularly among millennials and Gen Zs, how they perceive your brand is really how they decide what they're going to do. So like we've started to see that. So if you take anything away from that and you want to tweet that out, a social business is one where social media is strategically aligned with business outcomes. So this was the slide that changed my life. And I always want to give credit to the source of this slide, but it changed the way that I looked at social, and it gave me something to walk into. I've been in 4 different environments, and in working in different global environments, there's going to be different strategic focus areas for each. But this was something where the framework and the foundation of your teams, this was where you're able to make a difference between the businesses that would thrive in social and the businesses that would kind of see the impact of social. So one of the things that I do, and one of the things I encourage all of you to do, and I'll walk through these phases really quickly, but I encourage you to take this exercise, whether you're in social, digital marketing, and really assess where you are. So what this stage of the social business transformation is, how do you get from an initial activation or initial kind of framework that you have as a company? How do you get to a point where business is social, where there's this intertwined relationship between business and social? So you look at the phases that you're at. And so planning is more, some of you on the call today are just launching, not necessarily just launching social programs, but maybe you're expanding to a different region. Maybe you're expanding the scope of your social program. Maybe you're expanding with adding influencers, or you're expanding paid social. That planning phase is just where you're listening and learning. You're listening internally, externally, and you're learning. Most of us are at, have already passed phase 2, which is having a presence, right? So, a lot of us did this years ago, but look back at your presence, is it strategic? You know what I mean? Like, now you're establishing presences on TikTok and Snap and WhatsApp and other places. Then you start getting into the deeper integration stages, right? Engagement, where dialogue deepens relationships. So that dialogue is internal and that dialogue is external. So one of the things that I like to encourage my teams to do is, like, as a social team trying to build a social business, we have to be good listeners, we have to be good partners, and we have to be cognizant of our stakeholders. And we have the dialogue there where we come in there and we're spending more time listening, because I want to know what your pain points are. I want to know what you're being measured against. I want to know that. I want that dialogue to be centered around you, so then our social team can then provide a menu of solutions that can help. So that dialogue deepens your relationships, because you're going to need this very intricate network of relationships to build a social business. Then you start getting formalized. This is between this 4th step is where you've listened and learned, you staked a claim in the organization, you've had dialogue with stakeholders and C-suite leaders. Now you're trying to organize for scale. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But it's really, you're now looking at all of your resources, whether they be technology resources. You're looking at technology to handle your publishing and your listening and some of your other, so you're organizing that for scale. You're looking at your team, quite frankly. You're looking at your team and you're making an assessment to say, do I have not only the team members, but do I have the functions correct for us to be able to scale to be a more intricate part of the business? Do I need more people? Do I need to reorganize my team? One of the, things like that. Like, I've worked on several different teams where we've been structured very differently. And I'll talk about the structures that I prefer in a moment. Now you start going to strategic. Now you're starting to really start becoming that social business, because now you've organized for scale. So, like, when you go back to engagement, where you've had those dialogues and you've gone back to presence and planning, now you're starting to become that, because now you know that you're becoming a social business when folks start talking to you more often about social. You know that you're becoming a social business when people really start, you're sitting at the table and there's a question asked about, okay, we're about to launch this new product. Is there anything you're seeing on social that can inform that? or we're trying to connect more with millennials and Gen Zs. I know that's probably been said throughout this conference. You know, is there anything you're seeing, like where are they on social? Are they following us? Like, what does our audience structure look like? You know, do we have an opportunity there? You really start seeing it from a crisis management standpoint. You say, look, you know, we're heading into this new market, and is there anything that you're seeing that we should be informed? Now, so you start seeing that progress and you start seeing it become a social business. Then it's converged. At that point, business is social. And you know business is social when we get to this from two in a minute, but you start knowing that when social is distributed across the organization. Like your team might be leading it, but there are people with social acumen across the organization. When you start looking at marketing jobs, you know, when you're opening, when you're bringing in new talent, not just to the social team, but to the marketing function, it's not, it's a social media experience is not just, hey, it would be a plus, it would be an additive, it'd be something that would be great if you had it. No, you start really seeing it as it is a requirement, you know, that they have a working knowledge of social. You start seeing that, and not just people in, quite frankly, in the marketing function. When you start bringing in recruiters in your HR and talent development function, in your diversity and inclusion and equity function, in your innovation functions, you know, in your design functions, you start seeing people who have an understanding of social, and then you kind of know that your business is social. So this is an eye chart here, so I'm going to escape that, and I'll talk you through the from to on here. So we talked about what a social business is. So we've talked about that. We've talked about what a social business is. We've talked about kind of the journey that you're trying to get to. And each of you probably have done, you know, if we were to have comments activated here, you know, I'm pretty sure that some of you all are kind of assessing, you know, I'd love to see where you feel you are in this. You know, are you at the early phase, or, you know, is your business social? And if so, please connect with me offline because I can learn from you as well. But now let me give you some tangible ways to really go from and to that. I want to really look at 4 quick areas where you're from and you're to get to from being, you know, a business that does social to a social business in 2021. The first is it's how the social team is structured. How the social team is structured. And I know that varies. You know, some of you are blessed to have larger social teams. You know, your companies, your global companies have made a big investment in having the team. So this will be like a refresher for you. Most of us are in a space where social teams are never large enough in a social team leader's opinion, because we can always have more specialty roles. You can always have people who specialize in all of the different aspects of social, whether it's paid media, influencers, community management, creative, you know, all those different functions. But I think that what you want to do is really structure your team around 3 areas. You want to structure your team around 3 areas: content, community, and commerce. Content, community, and commerce. My strong recommendation and how my team is structured is that I have a small team. I have 3 people on the team. We have some other dotted lines, but that's the way I divide them up, because I think that it allows them to focus on each of these areas. Many times our teams are skewed one way or the other. Many of our teams are structured. You have 7 layers of people doing content. You have a content strategist, you have a content planner, and then maybe you have a creative team. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're building a lean team and you have to build it around strategic functions, a person doing your content, what you can do, this is how you can organize for scale. So I have 3 people on my team, and they're at the strategy level. So what my content person focuses on a strategic level is making sure that she is a liaison between all of the potential stakeholders internally that have a message they would like to push on social media, maybe have creative that they want to share, or have a very important milestone event happening. So that's how she moves with that and then communicates with the agency. If we were to layer that with additional people to organize for scale, then you would start having specialists that focus on things like doing the social calendar, making sure that your calendar, reporting out on performance. Then you can even add another layer of creative. If you're going to bring in in-house creative, have some folks that are really talented at quick turn social posting that can supplement whatever agency or external support you have. Then when you start getting into community, I think that's a very important function, because on my team, that person's function is to keep their nose to the ground, to learn what the customers are talking about. So the whole thing about content is it brings them in, but now community is what keeps them there. So whereas content engages with thousands of folks on a given space, one-to-one engagement is our community focus. So that person is at a strategic level, making sure that we're doing everything we can to listen to the customer and get that insight out to people, and then engage, whether it's surprise and delight. Surprising people with grills is a fun thing. Whether it's contests and activations, whether it's being in forums, with Facebook changing to focus more on groups and forums, it's important that you have somebody who can at least have a spreadsheet of the forums where people are talking about your brand. The third function I have is more of a commercial function. It's the person who works on the commerce strategy of how do all these things that we're doing, how do they translate to measurable results? So how do they translate to things like increasing our visits to the website? How does it translate into sales? How does it translate into CRM signups? So that's how you go from to. You kind of begin to structure your team more holistically across these groups. Now, the next way from to, going from a business that does social media to a social business, is the distribution of social, I would say, responsibilities. So I talked about your core team, your social team, your subject matter experts, but I also talked about making sure that you share that function, that others can bring social into their work streams, because obviously you can't be with every part of the business every day, but it's great to have dotted line reports and dotted line, almost like a social center of excellence model, to be able to talk to different folks and offer advice that they can implement. So you could take the best practices that you're learning on your channels and then help HR with employer brand and talent development, help innovation with, being able to have a social presence and those kind of things. So looking at the distribution of the social function, not just one team doing everything, but a team being a central group of social experts who can then help disseminate that throughout the organization. Like, for example, there are probably people who work on the comms function of your CEO or your C-suite leaders. Those are people that you can engage and train and teach to make sure that they can engage on social, your social care team, all of those different things. And then to piggyback on that, having a holistic strategy moves you to being a social business. Again, all of us are at various stages. And one of the challenges I've had is that sometimes I've been focused on the art of social more than the science. I think as we were coming on here, somebody made a great point about that. The art, the content. And while content is very important because it's your most visible asset that the organization sees, I love it that my C-suite leaders follow our platforms on social and they'll let us know, like, hey, that was great, or hey, we thought about this. Like, I love that visibility. So I know that's our most visible contribution to the organization. But again, community and commerce is just as important. If you spend a lot of money on content and your community, you don't have a community of folks, then you don't have people sharing that content. And worse, I've done in my career, I've spent a great deal on content only to have the content and the impact of the content muted because our community is not happy. And so our community doesn't look at the content as like a way to engage with, hey, I posted this great recipe, or hey, I posted this wonderful meme, or I posted this great video. No, they're looking at that as an opening to have to air their grievances with us. So I think community is important. Commerce is extremely important. And I'm not just talking about leveraging paid media to get conversions, because that is extremely important in another discipline in and of itself, to make sure that the right people are seeing your messages and the message is correct, and A/B testing to make sure you can drive sales. But I'm talking about social commerce. I'm talking about how do you leverage the tools that you have that are not necessarily paid media amplification to generate commerce. And commerce to me is defined as anything measurable. So again, trips to the website, sales, CRM signups, all those things that allow a deeper relationship between you and the customer. So like being able to look at your social strategy and say, am I equally focusing on these three areas? That helps you become a social business. And the last thing that I'll say, and then we'll go to Q&A, the from to is, somebody said this earlier, and I totally agree. Over a social career, you wear many hats. So at first I was an event planner. I was like an event planner. I was a social poster. I was in Canva and Photoshop and all these different things. But over time, you start to morph into a data scientist, if you will. And you start to really look at the data and really start to say, how can the data inform the decisions I'm making in social? And then how can I use the data and the insights to inform as well? So there's both how it informs you and how it informs others. When you start to take a data-driven approach, and I don't mean like, hey, every single post we got to say like, okay, let's focus group it, let's test it. But no, you start looking at patterns and behaviors in your content. Like, what do my folks like? When do they like to see it? What do they like to see? And how do they engage? What drives more engagement and what drives more sales? So you can have a balance of that. So you start looking at, does UGC drive more than my content? Does influencer content drive more than my content? Is it video versus static? Does my Facebook presence do the same numbers as my Instagram? If it doesn't, what's the nuances? So I think the last bit of your transformation, first the development of your social team, the distribution of the social function, the development of a holistic strategy, and then finally the use of data. I think that will start to move you along across that continuum to becoming a social business. And so that's what I've seen over my time. And I hope that, I've shared some good insights with you. And I don't know if we have time for a Q&A, but if we do, that would be great.
Yeah, that was good to know, to be social. Like you said, a decade back, social was different, and today, obviously true. We do have a department for taking care of the social media platform. So social can actually bring in business. Yes, we've seen this through many organizations, and how to make our own people social. Like you said, bringing in our own possible people who are there with us in the office, encourage them to be social, and make them social. So that's one way. And how do we really bring in an awareness for them? I still do see, talking about the privacy, people, reject to be on social. Uh, so how do we?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody, like one of the things I hope to drive home is that you don't necessarily have to be active on social to be a part of the social business. So I think, particularly when you get to like C-suite level as well, I would love for every CEO to be on social, but every CEO is not social naturally. I would like for every CEO to be there because there's a lot of data that shows that millennials gravitate to businesses where they feel like leadership is listening and tied in. But there's ways. I had a CEO many years ago that wasn't really interested in being involved in social it had some really good reasons. And so what we did was we said, okay, we can still leverage the influence of your voice by repurposing other things that you were doing. So like I had CEOs that were writing blogs for our magazine. I said, can I convert that into a blog post that's shared on social? They were like, yeah. I said, can I use social to encourage people to email you? They were like, yeah. can I interview you for social content? They were like, yeah. So I think that helps people, it's at their comfort level. Because the last thing I'll say about that is, like, if people are forced to be social, like even your employees, if you start saying, okay, all employees need to tag us and tweet, then it becomes inauthentic. So I say you can be social without, being on social media. There's ways to do it, and don't force people because it's inauthentic. But take the people within your organization, because you probably got somebody in R&D who loves social media. Let's tap into them. You got somebody in your innovation department you got somebody in finance. Well, yeah, okay, yeah. You got somebody in finance that loves social media. So like it's really engaging and involving those people that want to do it, so that those who don't can have their ability not to.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Curtis, for encouraging us to be on social.
Thank you. Have a
Yeah.
good day.
You too. Thank you.